Hey YouTube, how's it going? After quite a while of waiting, I finally got my hands on a full suspension mountain bike. I've been waiting forever. But I did have some issues, did have some stuff. Of course, it's probably no surprise, but a high-end full suspension bike is going to have tons of adjustments and really a lot of things that bring together ride characteristics that really significantly affect the way the bike rides. And the main reason why I wanted to make this video is because I had to spend a pretty substantial amount of time going and looking at manuals and finding numbers out and try to figure some things out that information wasn't necessarily readily available. This particular shock on this bike is a inline double barrel. So even when I went in the manual, it didn't give me an air pressure reference, okay? So there's two kinds of main rear suspension shocks, spring and air. So this is obviously air shock, doesn't have a spring in it. So I mean, you know, how much air you put in there is, has a huge effect on the suspension. So the manufacturer does you a favor and they don't give you any air specs. They tell you where you want to set it as far as sag, which is basically how much the suspension compresses when your body weight is on it. But then they don't give you any parameters like the limit, which after calling them I found out was about 300 psi. And on the rear suspension air shock, the weight that you're looking for is roughly your body weight. Now, you're going to get into preference at this point. If you roughly put in your body weight or just above your body weight, you're going to consume roughly 20% of your suspension travel, and that is your sag goal. Now, it's going to depend a lot on what your riding style is and how you want to set your bike up. If I'm going to set the bike up for hardcore downhill, really pushing the limits, obviously I'm going to put more air pressure into it, and I'm going to have the setup much more aggressive. I'm not going to do those things because I haven't ridden in a while. It's been a long while since I've mountain biked at all, and so I'm going to be starting off slow. So my suspension settings are going to be very vanilla, even to the side of light, because I'm not going to be pushing this bike real hard because I'm just not there yet. I'm going to get to know it, take my time with it. So, but some things, anyways, some tips I wanted to pass along to you that could maybe save you some time. So again, on this rear shock, if you have an air shock instead of a spring shock, you want to roughly fill the air shock up to about your body weight and go from there. If you go up, you're going to get, more support from the bike and less stiffness. And if you go down, you're going to get a lot more flexibility. The shock's going to be much lighter and easier to compress, but you may bottom it out in an aggressive maneuver, a big jump or hitting a large rock, especially if you're riding aggressively. So for average riders, put your weight in PSI and off you go. Now, speaking of putting air in, so I took a traditional compressor pump. This is my little Air Hawk here. And I really like this little pump. It's great. I top tires off on the cars with it. All the other bikes works great, mostly with the traditional Schrader valve on the end, but then I got a Presto valve converter in there in case I need it. If not, I just take it out. But for suspension, this will not do. This is not going to work, okay? Because you don't have a pin engagement thing, okay? This just engages the pin as it screws on. And you can't have it engaging the pin as you're screwing it off. When it comes to suspension, you can't have any air leaks. You want to be able to dial in a pressure, pop the pin, and then unscrew it and have no change in PSI. So a pump like this or any kind of traditional pump is not going to work. So for a full suspension mountain bike, you're definitely going to want to get your hands on something like this. So the big difference with this pump is that it has a lock on it. Okay, you got this lock right here. Okay, so I can screw it all the way on, lock it, then put the PSI I desire into the gauge via the gauge here. Okay, and then I can unlock it and unscrew it, and the thing has the remaining PSI. Now, when I got my hands on the bike, the back pump had, I think it was roughly 20 pounds of pressure, and the front had, I think it was 17. Okay, and the tires had about 20 PSI. Now again, this is going to be one of those riding preference things. If you're out there and you're doing a lot downhill on aggressive trails and you really need the traction, you're going to drop the PSI down low like that. For somebody who's really looking for all-terrain surfaces and everything, we're going to go a little higher, like around 30 PSI. Me, I like to get out there and cover the distance. Sometimes I might even be riding this bike on the bike trail. So I'm running 40 PSI. But again, this pump is really great, or any pump with a locking engager, because you can pump right to the PSI you want, unlock it, and it doesn't lose any. The tires were at 20 PSI and roughly 20 on the shocks. Everything was at 20 PSI. The first ride, I was so excited to get this bike. It was in beautiful condition. I went out and I rode it 10 miles, and I'll be honest with you, it was punishing. It just soaked the life out of me, because with every step that I took, the tires, the shocks, everything was just stealing my energy. And not to mention, I haven't ridden a mountain bike in 15 years. So I was all excited, and I went out and I did my first 10-mile ride, and I was hurting. And I was like, man, to be totally honest, it wasn't what I hoped for. It was kind of miserable. The seat had a race face seat on it that was rock hard race face seat. So I pulled the seat off and I put a cushier seat on there. It's not much bigger. It doesn't weigh much more. The difference is super minimal, but just a little bit of cushion in that seat makes a huge difference when you get out and ride the bike. So put this pump on there, brought the tires up to 40 PSI. Now for the air shock for the rear, you want to shoot for your body weight. So I would put it up around 205 pounds. And again, I'm not riding super aggressive. I'm getting to know this bike, and my skill level's not that high right now. So I may actually go down to 190 or stick around 205, my body weight. The back shock, that's where I set it, 205 pounds. The front shocks, you get it into the manual, and they give you like a translation between your weight and where you should set your PSI. And the front shocks, by the way, there's variance there year to year, so you have to figure it out and see which one you have. I could tell by the colors of the stickers and the design of the body that my fork is a 2015 fork, which makes sense because this back shock is about a 2015 shock too. If you buy the bike used, it's going to be a lot more homework on you to try to kind of figure these things out. But either way, if it's a Fox, this is a Fox Factory 36 here on this bike. A great shock. I really love it. So anyways, the manual calls for, I believe it's 84 PSI for a weight range of 190 to 210. So I just put it at 84 PSI with this pump here. Took the bike out for a ride. It's like a whole different bike. I mean, the difference with the tires having the pressure and the back shock having the pressure and front shocks having the pressure, it's like a whole different bike. So, but some stuff you should also do is when you're putting pressure in this front fork, and I did notice a difference, don't fill the pressure up all at once. Put like 15 PSI in there and then compress and rebound the shock so that the negative and the positive chambers can balance out. Okay, because there's two chambers in the shock. If you pressurize the shock using the valve, you're pressurizing the high side. So if you just get it to the pressure you want, then you take this thing off, compresses a couple times, it equalizes out with the low side, and now your pressure is different. So use this pump, put about 15 PSI, compress the shock, release the shock, compress, release. Put another 15, compress, release, compress, release, compress, release. Put another 15, compress, release. So I did that, and I worked my way up. And the first time I put all the air in all at once, the shock it just didn't feel good. And maybe, it was sticking. There was stiction going on. It just wasn't working well. When I did the 15 PSI and compressed and uncompressed, now the shock is smooth. It's totally smooth. I took the bike out, took it for a ride. oh my God, what a difference. I mean, the bike is so much more alive now. I mean, you just put your foot down on the pedal and it translates the power to the wheel, and it's off, and it's the experience that I pretty much remember, except a lot more comfortable because it's full suspension now. So the front fork, so while we're on the subject, when you're setting these things, again, you're looking for sag, which is where the shock sits with your body weight on it, which you want to be roughly 20% the distance of your travel. Some people use 15, some people use 25. You'll have to figure that out, but you can just start at 20%, okay? The problem I had was that I didn't know if this was a 160 or a 180 millimeter because there's two. And so you have to measure this piece that is in the shock. I thought it was the top piece, and the top pieces inside the shock you can take out while the shock's on the bike. It's pretty easy. You just use a ratchet tool and take this top cap off, and the top section comes right out. But the bottom section, you have to take the whole fork apart to get out. That's the section that you have to measure. Well, when you do it, all the oil comes out of the shock as well. So then you have to reload the oil. Now you have to get the oil, you have to take the whole shock apart. This is to find out the distance. Now, I would assume if you buy the bike brand new, they tell you the distance, but this did not. I didn't know whether it was a 160 or a 180, and to be honest with you, I still don't know now because I wasn't taking the whole shock apart. I just don't have the time for that right now. At some point, I will, but at the minimum, I got to get my hands on the oil so that when I take it all apart, I can replace the oil. But I have it taking up about 20% of what I think the travel is. I set the sag, okay? So now we have the sag on the back and the sag on the front set up. So the next thing is compression and rebound settings. Now, what I would recommend that you do for setting your compression and rebound settings, they were all over the map on this bike. There's compression and high speed and low speed compression and rebound adjustments on the front and the back shocks. So there's basically 4 adjustments on each shock. There's only 3 on the front for this year, but now there's 4 with the new one. My recommendation to you, and what I wound up doing was figure out the number of clicks that's in each of those adjustments and then go to the middle. And then go from there. Take it out on the trails and see how you like it. If you're in that place where you're pushing your bike and your gear, your skill level is up here, and you're really pushing your gear, then you're probably going to go for more aggressive, higher settings. If you're where I am and you're maybe even doing some bike trail, some pretty low-key stuff that I'm doing right now, I'm starting in the middle. I may take a couple clicks to the softer side, a couple clicks lower. So figure out the number of clicks. What I found in clicks, by the way, was that with the high speed rebound, the rebound, I only had 4 rotations. It was a knob that I turned on this particular shock. So what did I do? I went all the way one way, and then I went 2 rotations around. I put a mark on it, and I went 2 rotations around. So it's set at 50% right now. And then on the low speed compression and rebound, there's 22 clicks. I counted them. So I just went all the way to one side, and then I subtracted 11. So it's set at 50%. So this is at 50%. Everything's at 50%. You take the cap off on the other side of the shock. Oh no, I'm sorry. You don't take the cap off on there. On the other side, the adjustments are right on top. I believe it was 22 adjustments for the center and 12 for the outside ring. So just figure out the number of clicks that's in your suspension and then go to the middle and ride it and figure it out from there. And you can tweak your high speed compression and rebound and tweak your air pressures from there. But where to start, especially for less aggressive stuff, is to figure out your whole range and then get it to the middle and then ride it and go from there. So hopefully that helps you out. If you, for full suspension, just some information for you there on how to set it up. It took me a good couple of hours to get into the manuals online. I had to call customer support to find out about the air pressure on the rear. So hopefully in 14 minutes here, I just took you through what took me 2 hours to get some answers to. The bike I love. This is a Knolly Chilcotin, which Chilcotin is a region of Canada. a mountainous region, so that's where that name comes from. Sort of a semi-custom built bike. It's got Fox factory forks, 36s on the fronts. Super happy with the bike. I love the bike. I love the bike a lot more with these suspension settings. So if you're new to full suspension, or you're just curious about how to get those settings up to speed for you to, you know, where to go, where to start from, that's what I'd recommend. Back shock, your body weight, and go from there. Front shock, you got to look at the manual. For this particular Fox one, it was 84 psi for my body weight range, and you're going to have to figure out the year of your shock and to go in there and figure out the parameters around it. So I mean, at least that gives you something to start with. And then there's different dampeners that are in the shocks and stuff, so you're going to have to figure out which shock you have and which dampener system you have. It's going to take a little bit of time. If you don't want to go through all that, I mean, honestly, I could have just counted the number of clicks and set it in the middle. You could do that if, you know, I mean, I would wind up right where I'm at right now, and if I had just done that. The last thing about the shock, though, is that there is inserts, tokens that go inside the shock, okay? And so the function of those tokens is that when the shock fully compresses, the front shock, what this is, fork shock, fully compresses, you just have unlimited travel and everything else. It can bottom out, and at the point of bottoming out, you can do damage to your shock. So this particular one from the factory comes with one token. It's like a little plastic piece that inserts on the arm. So right before you bottom out, you hit this little spongy token that will give you higher resistance right before bottoming out. So they come with one. People that ride super aggressively, so what I've seen from the videos, they put more and more tokens in their shocks. So I ordered 2 more. So my guess is I'm probably going to run it with 2 because that's just what I've heard, and I'm not a super aggressive rider. I'll probably run it with 2. If a day comes where I feel like I'm hitting those tokens and I'm compounding them and I could bottom the shock out, then I'll add a 3rd. But I have also heard that adding and subtracting those tokens affects the way the shock handles overall because it changes the volumes inside. So you really have to play with it. Now, what's good about the tokens is that they can be accessed very easily. You just use your tool or a ratchet piece and take the left side of the shock out, and the tokens just clip on and off the arm that's in there. So it's not a project to take them on and off. But you are going to have to figure out which tokens you need for your shock, which is going to make you need to find out what year your shock is, and then get the appropriate tokens to insert into there. I would start, if I was you, by pulling it out and taking a look. I mean, you may be maxed out already. But it affects the way the shock rides, and I'm going to dig into that a little more. But I can tell you, just by going from where this bike was to what I did to it, oh my, I mean, the ride is unquestionably different. This is a must. You have to have a pump with a locking end on it in order to get those pressures really right where you want them. This thing was well worth it. I paid $50 for it. Well worth it. This is a cool pump. I would use it on anything with a Schrader valve, but anything with a Presto valve, this is just not, it's not what you want to do. So hopefully that helps you out on the full suspension aspect of things and tuning your suspension. There's a lot better videos, that go into taking them apart, but I wanted to do a basic how to get started and where to figure out where you're at to basically offer people, what took me many hours to figure out on my own. So, all right, take it easy, and we'll see you out on the trails.